You wake up tired, not the kind of tired that makes sense after a late night or a hard week. The kind that's just there, sitting in your body before the day has even started, like you never fully left the previous day. You go through the motions, the shower, the coffee, the commute, or the walk to the desk, and by mid-morning, you're already running on something close to empty. You get through the day because you have to. You arrive at the evening and you don't have the energy to do anything meaningful, so you scroll, or watch something, or just exist in a low-energy holding pattern until sleep comes, and then you do it again. And the exhaustion isn't dramatic. It isn't a breakdown, it's just a permanent baseline, a gray, dull weight that you've started to assume is just how you are now, just what being an adult in this era feels like. You've probably already looked for the obvious explanations. Not enough sleep, too much caffeine, not enough exercise, too much stress, and maybe some of those things are true, but a lot of people who address all of them, who sleep more, drink less coffee, move more, reduce obvious stressors, find that the exhaustion doesn't fully lift. It improves slightly, maybe, but the baseline heaviness remains. And that persistence is a signal worth paying attention to, because it suggests the source of the depletion isn't where most people are looking for it. The invisible habit keeping most people exhausted isn't something you'd find on a list of bad habits. It's not staying up too late, or eating poorly, or avoiding exercise. It's something more subtle, more constant, and far more socially normalized. It's the habit of continuous mental availability, the habit of never being fully off, the habit of existing in a permanent state of low-level readiness, always half monitoring, always half reachable, always half managing something, even during the hours that are supposed to be rest. Most people don't experience it as a habit because it doesn't feel like doing something, it feels like just being, but the nervous system doesn't make that distinction. From the perspective of your body's stress response system, there is a significant difference between genuine rest and the kind of passive, digitally connected, mentally half-in state that passes for rest in modern life. And the difference matters enormously, because only one of them allows the deep physiological recovery that prevents exhaustion from accumulating. To understand why, it helps to understand what exhaustion at this level actually is. Physical tiredness is straightforward. Your muscles deplete their energy. They signal fatigue, you rest, they restore. But the exhaustion most people describe, the heavy, persistent, sleep doesn't fix it kind, is primarily a nervous system state. It's what happens when the system responsible for your alertness, your stress response, your emotional regulation, and your cognitive function stays activated for too long without completing a full recovery cycle. The nervous system has two primary modes, one oriented toward engagement and response, one oriented toward rest and restoration. You need both. You need to move between them fluidly. And the modern lifestyle has quietly made the second mode very difficult to actually enter, because entering it requires a degree of genuine disengagement that almost nobody practices anymore. Here's where things get strange. The resting you do in the evening, the sitting on the couch, the lying in bed scrolling, the watching television with your phone nearby, feels like recovery. It looks like recovery from the outside. You're horizontal, you're not working, you're technically off the clock. But your nervous system is reading a very different situation. The phone on the table is registering as a potential demand. The notifications arriving, even unread, are signals that the world is active and might need something from you. The content you're consuming, news, social media, emotionally loaded videos, is generating low-level emotional responses that the stress system has to process. And the background awareness of everything unresolved, the emails you didn't answer, the things you need to do tomorrow, the conversations you're half expecting, is keeping the activation mode running at idle rather than shutting it down. And this is why that matters so much. You can spend 8 hours in that state and wake up feeling like you didn't rest, because you didn't. Not in the way your nervous system needed. The hours passed, the body was still, but the system that needed to switch off and run its restoration cycle never fully got the signal to do so. Recovery requires not just the absence of work, but the genuine absence of readiness. It requires moments where your nervous system gets a clear, unambiguous message that nothing is required of you right now, that no monitoring is necessary, that you can fully disengage. And those moments, in a connected, always available modern life, require deliberate creation. They don't arrive on their own anymore. What most people miss is how early in the day this pattern starts. It's not just the evening, it begins in the morning, often before getting out of bed. The first action of the day for most people is checking their phone. Before coffee, before movement, before a single breath of genuine waking. The mind is already receiving information, already registering demands, already loading the day's emotional context. The nervous system, which was supposed to ease gradually from sleep into wakefulness, is instead jerked into alertness by a feed of other people's activity, messages, news, and social signals. And so the day begins already in response mode, already managing incoming, already behind in the sense that the world has been happening without you, and now you're catching up. The activation that should build gradually across the morning arrives all at once before you've even stood up. And it never fully dissipates, because the next input arrives before the previous one has been processed. This accumulation is the core of the pattern. Not one overwhelming event, but hundreds of small activations per day, each one minor, each one seemingly manageable, collectively producing a chronic load that the nervous system carries continuously, without relief. Think of it like a muscle that is asked to stay tensed all day, not maximally, just slightly, constantly. At the end of the day, that muscle isn't acutely painful. It's just depleted in a way that rest in the usual sense doesn't reach, because even at rest, it never fully released. The emotional layer of this is also worth sitting with, because the mental availability habit has a psychological dimension that goes beyond just managing information. Being constantly available means being constantly valuable. Every message you might receive is a potential judgment. Every response you give is being read and interpreted. Every post you make or don't make, every reaction you have or withhold, is part of a continuous social performance that requires monitoring and management. This isn't paranoia. This is accurate. The social environment of modern connected life is genuinely evaluative, genuinely continuous, and genuinely demanding in ways that previous generations didn't encounter at this scale or this frequency. And navigating it all day, every day, even passively, is emotionally expensive in a way that accumulates into exactly the kind of exhaustion most people carry. There is also a particular cost that comes from the habit of emotional suppression that continuous availability tends to produce. When you are always reachable, always potentially observed, always managing how you're coming across, there is very little space for processing what you actually feel. The minor frustrations, the small griefs, the moments of genuine anxiety or sadness get pushed down or managed rather than felt and moved through. An unexpressed, unprocessed, emotional content doesn't disappear. It stays in the body. It adds to the weight. It contributes to the baseline heaviness that feels like tiredness but is actually something closer to accumulated, unprocessed feeling. The exhaustion of never being fully honest about your inner state, even just to yourself, is real and significant. And it doesn't respond to sleep because sleep doesn't process what you haven't let yourself feel while awake. Understanding all of this changes what addressing the exhaustion looks like. Because if the source is continuous activation, continuous availability, and the absence of genuine recovery conditions, then the solution isn't more sleep or better nutrition, though both help. The solution is the deliberate, consistent practice of actual disengagement. Not performed rest, real rest. Rest that gives the nervous system the clear signal that nothing is required, nothing is being monitored, nothing needs managing right now. This looks different for different people, but it tends to involve a few consistent elements. The first is protecting a genuine offline window each day. Not a long one, not a dramatic digital detox, just a period, even 30 or 40 minutes, where the phone is in another room, where no content is being consumed, where the mind is allowed to be unoccupied. Walking without audio, sitting without a screen, doing something physical, and absorbing that has no social dimension and no output. These windows feel uncomfortable at first, particularly if you've been in the continuous availability habit for years, because the nervous system has been trained to expect input and produces a kind of restless urgency when none arrives. But that restlessness, if you don't immediately relieve it, passes, and what follows it, gradually, is something that feels unfamiliar and valuable. Actual quiet, actual rest. The beginning of what recovery feels like when it's real. The second element is the morning. What you do in the first 15 or 20 minutes after waking has a disproportionate influence on the activation level of your entire day. A morning that begins with genuine stillness, with movement, with something that belongs to you before the world's demands arrive, produces a different nervous system baseline than one that begins with an inbox or a feed. Not because mornings are magical, but because the nervous system's transition from sleep to full activation is a window where you have unusual influence over where the dial gets set. Using that window for input from the outside world sets the dial high immediately, and it tends to stay there. Using it for something slower and more internal allows the transition to happen at a pace the body can manage, which reduces the background activation level for hours afterward. The third element is the evening transition, the deliberate downshift before sleep that allows the nervous system to actually complete its cycle rather than running at idle through the night. This doesn't require a complex routine. It requires reducing stimulation and social monitoring in the hour before sleep with enough consistency that the body starts to associate that window with the beginning of its shutdown. The quality of sleep that follows genuine nervous system downshifting is measurably different from the sleep that follows scrolling until your eyes close. Not longer necessarily. Different at the level of restoration. and cumulative nights of actual recovery begin to lift a baseline that nothing else reached. None of this is glamorous. None of it is a transformation. It's just the quiet, consistent removal of the conditions that were keeping the activation loop running, and the creation of small but real spaces for the recovery that was never quite happening. The habit that was draining you wasn't visible because it wasn't something you were doing. It was something you weren't doing. You weren't stopping. You weren't fully arriving at rest. You were always, in some small way, still on, and the body kept the bill running the whole time. The exhaustion you've been carrying isn't who you are. It's what a particular pattern produces. And patterns, once seen clearly, can change. If this felt familiar, comment hidden habit. It helps me know this is something more people are silently dealing with.